At 3 in the morning, just as the Blue Lotus Lounge's jazz quartet finished their final set and the smoke from 100 cigarettes hung like ghosts in the air, a small figure appeared in the doorway, a little girl in striped pajamas, clutching a worn teddy bear, her wide eyes reflecting the cyan glow of the neon lotus overhead. The room didn't fall silent immediately. Glasses still clinked, conversation still murmured, until she walked straight past the hostess, past the enforcers in their tailored suits, and stopped directly in front of Chong-ji's private booth. She looked up at the tattooed man with the geometric shoulder ink and the cold, calculating gaze, and in a voice that somehow carried over the entire room, said, "My mommy told me the man with the flower tattoo keeps his promises. They took her and my baby brother. Please." It was not the kind of business anyone conducted at the Blue Lotus that night. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love knowing where these stories travel. Chong-ji didn't move for a long moment, his dark eyes studying the child who had just violated every protocol of the sanctuary. Around him, his lieutenants shifted uncomfortably. One reached the girl's shoulder to escort her out, but Ji raised a single finger, freezing the entire room in place. He leaned forward, the overhead light catching the sharp angles of his face, the geometric tattoo on his shoulder seeming to pulse in the dim atmosphere. "What's your name?" His voice was low, almost gentle, a tone his men had rarely heard. "Maria," she whispered, hugging the teddy bear tighter. They came in a big white van. The men had uniforms and badges, but Mommy screamed that they were lying. They said we had to come with them for processing. I ran out the back door like she told me. G's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Badges, uniforms, processing. He knew exactly who she was describing. The Cleaners, a private security force that operated under protection of city officials, running a trafficking operation disguised as immigration enforcement. They were supposed to be untouchable. They were also, technically, on his payroll for territory cooperation. Not anymore. He extended his hand slowly, and Maria placed her small fingers in his palm. The contrast was stark. His knuckles scarred and tattooed, hers soft and trembling. "I keep my promises," G said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "No one will touch you here, and we will bring your family home." Behind him, his second-in-command, Quan, cleared his throat. "G, the Cleaners operate under Councilman Park's protection. If we move against them, then we move against them," G interrupted, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. "Lock down the Lotus. No one in or out without my approval. Send word to our network. I want every piece of intelligence on the Cleaners' operations in the next hour. And find out where they're holding a young woman and an infant." The room erupted into controlled chaos as enforcers pulled out phones, the hostess ushered patrons toward the exits, and the bartender began covering bottles. G stood, still holding Maria's hand, and led her toward the back office where a leather couch and a mini fridge stocked with juice boxes waited, remnants of another child he'd once sheltered years ago. As he settled her onto the couch and handed her an apple juice, Maria looked up at him with eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. "Are you scared of them?" she asked quietly. G crouched down to her eye level, his expression softening in a way that would have shocked his enemies. "No, little one. They should be scared of me." And in that moment, as the Blue Lotus Lounge transformed from a den of calculated vice into a war room, Chong-ji made a decision that would either cement his legend or destroy everything he'd built. He would break every alliance, betray every arrangement, and burn every bridge necessary to keep the promise he'd just made to a child in princess pajamas. Because some things mattered more than territory, more than profit, more than survival in the underworld. Some things were worth being a monster for. The steel shutters descended over the Blue Lotus Lounge's windows with mechanical hiss, sealing the establishment from the outside world. G watched from his office doorway as his men moved with practiced efficiency. Phones disappeared into signal-blocking pouches, security cameras were switched to internal-only feeds, and the 3 exits were reinforced with additional personnel. Maria had fallen asleep on the leather couch behind him, her teddy bear clutched against her chest, oblivious to the small army mobilizing on her behalf. Quan stood the main floor, his tailored jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal his own tattoos, a tiger mid-leap across his forearm. He was coordinating the lockdown with sharp hand gestures and clip commands, but G could read the tension in his lieutenant's shoulders. The way his jaw worked overtime on a piece of gum, he always chewed when stressed. Status, G said as he descended the stairs, his footfall silent despite the weight of what he was about to unleash. Perimeter secure. External communications cut, except for encrypted channels. The boys on the street are spreading word. Anyone associated with us needs to go dark for the next 12 hours. Quan paused, glancing at the closed office door where Maria slept. Intel team is pulling everything they have on the cleaner's operations. Should have locations within the hour. G nodded, moving toward the bar where a detailed map of the district had already been spread across the polished wood. Red pins marked their territory, blue pins marked neutral zones, and yellow pins. There were too many yellow pins. Marked locations where the cleaners have been sighted in the past month. "We've got a problem," Quan said, his voice dropping lower. He moved closer, ensuring only G could hear. 3 of those yellow pins are warehouses we help facilitate. Councilman Park's people paid us good money to look the other way when they moved paperwork through our district. G's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the edge of the bar. And now we know what that paperwork was. Families, G. They've been moving families right under our noses, and we took their money. Quan's voice carried an edge of disgust, but also something else, fear. If we move against them now, it's not just breaking arrangement. It's admitting we were complicit. The other syndicates will see us as weak, compromised. And Park has connections that go all the way to the governor's office. The room had gone quiet. The other men pretended to focus on their tasks, but G knew they were listening. This was the moment where leadership was either solidified or shattered. He straightened, his voice carrying across the space with the force of pronouncement. Everyone listened. 20 sets of eyes turned toward him. 15 years ago, when the Black Crane Syndicate was just 5 of us operating out of a noodle shop, we made a pact. We would never be the monsters that prey on the helpless. We would never be the wolves that devour the lambs. He paused, letting the word settle. We control vice, not virtue. We traffic in choices adults make, gambling, substances, protection for those who can afford it. But we do not traffic in innocence. We do not trade in children. We do not destroy families. One of the younger enforcers, barely 22, raised his hand tentatively. But boss, didn't we just... Yes. G cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. We took their money. We facilitated their movements. And that blood is on our hands now, which is why we're going to wash it clean. He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. This is not negotiable. This is not a vote. This is the law of the streets. The only law that matters in our world. You protect your territory. Yes. You eliminate your enemies. Yes. But you never, ever prey on those who cannot fight back. Quan stepped forward, his voice steady but challenging. And if the other families see this as weakness, if they think we've gone soft, that we're choosing a little girl over our business relationships with the most powerful men in the city, G's smile was cold, predatory. Then they fundamentally misunderstand what makes us dangerous. He moved to the map, his finger tracing a route through the district. The Jade Dragons run the docks. The Iron Brotherhood controls the construction unions. The Red Knives own the entertainment district. And what do we control? Information, Quan answered, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. We control the information networks. Exactly. Every street vendor, every taxi driver, every shop owner in a 12-block radius reports to us. Every corrupt cop who takes our money. Every politician who uses our venues for their indiscretions. We know their secrets. G's voice dropped to something almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. Councilman Park thinks he's untouchable because he has badges and legal authority. But we have something better. We have proof. And we have the streets. He turned back to his men, his presence filling the room. So here's how this works. We find where they're holding Maria's family. We extract them. And then we make sure that every piece of evidence we've been collecting on the cleaner's operation, every transaction, every victim, every corrupt signature gets delivered to the right people. Not the people Park owns, but the ones who want his position, the ambitious prosecutors, the reform-minded journalists, the federal investigators who've been trying to crack this city's corruption for years. We become the heroes, one of the enforcers said, his tone uncertain. No, G corrected. We remain the villains, but we become the villains with standards. The monsters parents point to and say, even they won't hurt you. That's worth more than any alliance with Park's people. That's the kind of reputation that makes you untouchable. Quan pulled out his phone, his thumbs already flying across the screen. I'll reach out to our contact at the prosecutor's office, the one whose daughter we helped when she got mixed up with that underground gambling ring. Good. And Quan, G waited until his second-in-command looked up. After tonight, we audit every arrangement, every deal, every source of income. If it doesn't align with who we say we are, we burn it. Understood. Understood. Quan's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more resolute. The shadow protocol is in effect. We're ghosts until this is done. G nodded, turning back toward the office where Maria slept. Through the doorway, he could see her small form curled on the couch, her teddy bear's button eye catching the lamplight. She looked peaceful, trusting. She had walked into a den of criminals and found sanctuary because someone had told her the man with the flower tattoo kept his promises. Give me everything on the cleaners in 30 minutes. G said quietly. Locations, personnel, schedules. I want to know every breath they take. As his men dispersed into focused action, Quan lingered. G, you know this is going to cost us, right? Even if we win. Everything worth doing costs us something, G replied, his eyes still on the sleeping child. The question is whether we're paying the price for who we want to be or who we're afraid of becoming. Quan nodded slowly, then moved to join the others. G remained at the doorway, watching Maria sleep, watching his men transform the Blue Lotus from a nightclub into a war room, feeling the weight of the promise he'd made and the war he'd just declared. Outside, the city continued its indifferent sprawl, unaware that in a smoky lounge in a forgotten district, the monsters were deciding to be something else tonight, something that might not redeem them, might not save their souls, but would at least let them look at themselves in the mirror come morning. The shadow protocol had begun, and the cleaners were about to learn that there were worse things in the dark than corrupt officials with badges. There were men like Chang-Ji, who had just been given a reason to remember why he was feared. The knock came at 4:17 a.m., sharp and authoritative, the kind of knock that expected doors to open immediately. G was studying surveillance photos spread across his desk when he heard it, grainy images of the cleaners' known operatives and their vehicle patterns. Maria stirred on the couch but didn't wake, her breathing steady and soft. He pressed a button on his desk, and a monitor flickered to life, showing the front entrance of the Blue Lotus. 4 men stood outside. 3 wore the dark tactical uniforms of private security, complete with body armor and sidearms visible in their holsters. The 4th wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his silver hair immaculately styled, a badge clipped to his belt. Captain Lee Sang-min, head of the cleaners' operations in the district. G had met him twice before at cooperation meetings, facilitated by Councilman Park's office. We have a problem. Quan's voice came through the intercom. He was downstairs, watching the same feed. Lee brought muscle. They're armed, and this isn't a social call. G stood, rolling his shoulders, feeling the geometric tattoo on his skin seem to tighten with anticipation. Let them in. Route them to the main floor. I'll be down in 30 seconds. G, they're probably here for the girl. If they have a warrant. They don't have a warrant. If they did, they had brought real police, not their private thugs. G moved to the couch, gently adjusting the blanket over Maria's sleeping form. And even if they did, this is my house. My rules. He descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, each footfall measured and precise. The main floor of the Blue Lotus had been clear of civilians hours ago, leaving only his inner circle. 12 men positioned strategically around the room, their weapons concealed but accessible. The atmosphere was charged, electric, like the moment before lightning struck. Captain Lee stood in the center of the room, flanked by his 3 operatives. He had the bearing of a man accustomed to compliance. His posture relaxed in a way that suggested he'd never been truly challenged. When he saw G, he smiled, a politician smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Mr. Chong, I apologize for the late hour, but we have urgent business." G stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his hands loose at his sides. "Captain Lee, I don't recall scheduling a meeting." "Yes, well, circumstances have forced our hand." Lee's smile remained fixed. "We're looking for a child, a girl, approximately 6 years old, who fled from a lawful immigration processing operation earlier tonight. We have reason to believe she may have sought refuge here." Immigration processing. G's voice was flat, emotionless. "At 3 a.m, in a residential neighborhood. The timing is unfortunate, but the law doesn't operate on a convenient schedule." Lee took a step forward, and immediately G's men shifted, subtle movements. But the message was clear. Lee noticed, and his smile tightened. "Mr. Chong, I know we've had a mutually beneficial relationship with your organization. I'd hate for a misunderstanding over a child to jeopardize that." "There's no misunderstanding," G said quietly. "You're trafficking families, using fake badges and government authority to kidnap people who can't fight back. And you want me to hand over a 6-year-old girl so you can sell her and her infant brother to the highest bidder." The room went absolutely still. Lee's smile vanished, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "That's quite an accusation. Do you have any proof of these claims?" "I will by morning." G's gaze was unwavering. "But right now, I don't need proof. I need you to understand something very clearly. The girl is under my protection. She stays here. You leave. That's how this ends." One of Lee's operatives, a thick-necked man with a scar across his jaw, shifted his hand toward his weapon. "You're harboring a fugitive from a legal—" "Don't." G's voice cut through the tension like a blade, and the operative froze. "Don't reach for that weapon unless you're prepared to use it. And if you use it in my establishment, you'd better hope you don't miss, because you won't get a second chance." Lee held up a placating hand to his man, though his eyes remained locked on G. "Let's not escalate this unnecessarily. We can involve the actual authorities, if you prefer. The police commissioner is a personal friend. I'm sure he'd be interested to know about all the fascinating activities that occur in this establishment. By all means, call him." G's expression didn't change. "I'm sure he'd love to explain to media why his friend runs a child trafficking operation, especially when the evidence of that operation gets leaked to every news outlet in the city." He paused, letting that sink in, "which is exactly what will happen if anything unfortunate occurs here tonight." Quan materialized at G's shoulder, holding a tablet. "We've already compiled quite the dossier, Captain. 12 families reported missing in the past 6 months, all from this district. Witnesses describing vehicles matching your fleet. Bank transfers from shell corporations linked to Councilman Park's office to offshore accounts." He turned the tab around, showing Lee a spreadsheet of transactions. "And these are just the highlights. The full package is currently sitting in an encrypted cloud folder with a dead man switch. If we don't deactivate it every 12 hours, it automatically sends to our media contacts." Lee's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare." "I would dare quite a lot for a child who asked me for help." G took a single step forward, and somehow that small movement made him seem to fill the entire room. "You see, Captain, you made a critical error. You assumed I was a businessman first and a criminal second, that I'd weigh profit against principle and choose profit every time. Another step. But I'm not a businessman. I'm a syndicate leader. And, in my world, reputation is everything. The reputation that when someone comes to the Black Crane for protection, they get it, that there are lines even we won't cross." "You're declaring war," Lee said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "over one child. Do you understand what that means? Councilman Park has connections that reach." "I'm not declaring war." G's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I'm explaining the terms of your surrender. You leave now. You release Maria's mother and brother within the next 6 hours. You shut down your operation, in this district permanently. And in exchange, I don't destroy you and everyone connected to you." He tilted his head slightly. "That's not war, Captain. That's mercy." The scarred operative's hand twitched toward his weapon again. This time, he actually touched it, fingers wrapping around the grip. The click of safeties being disengaged echoed through the room. Not from the operative's gun, but from a dozen weapons held by G's men, all trained on Lee and his people with professional precision. "I'd reconsider that," Quan said mildly. "You might get one of us. Might, but you won't get all of us. And you definitely won't leave this room alive." Lee raised both hands slowly, carefully, and his operative reluctantly released his weapon. "This is a mistake, Chong. You're protecting a nobody, a child with no family, no resources, no value. She has value to me." G's words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute finality. "And that makes her more protected than you will ever be." He gestured toward the door. 6 hours, Captain. Mother and child, unharmed, delivered to a location of my choosing. Or the evidence goes public, and you can explain to a federal prosecutor why you're on video discussing processing quotas with known traffickers. Lee stood there for a long moment, calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he straightened his jacket and nodded curtly. "You've made a powerful enemy today." "I've made many powerful enemies," G replied. "I'm still here. Will you be able to say the same in 6 hours? The captain turned and walked toward the exit, his operatives falling in behind him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. The girl's mother is already dead. The baby is scheduled for transfer at dawn. Even if you win this, you lose. G's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something ancient and terrible. "Then I suggest you unschedule that transfer, because if that baby is harmed, there is no place on earth you'll be safe from me, no authority that will protect you, no amount of money that will save you." He smiled, and it was nothing like Lee's politician smile. It was a smile of a predator who had just scented blood. "That's not a threat, Captain. That's a promise from a man with a flower tattoo, and I keep my promises." Lee's face went rigid, and without another word, he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. His men followed, and the steel shutters descended once more, sealing the Blue Lotus. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Quan let out a long breath. "Well, that's officially the start of it." "Yes," she said quietly, still staring at the closed door. "Now we find out if we're as dangerous as we think we are." Upstairs, Maria began to cry in her sleep, calling for her mother. G turned and climbed the stairs, moving toward that sound with the same deliberate purpose he brought to everything. Because somewhere in this city, a woman might already be dead, and an infant was hours away from being sold like livestock. And Chang Ji had just bet everything, his empire, his life, his soul, that he could stop it. The badge and the blade had met, and neither had drawn blood. Yet, G sat in the darkness of his office. The only light coming from the city beyond the window, a tapestry of neon and shadow that never truly slept. Maria had quieted after he'd sat beside her for 20 minutes. His presence alone enough to chase away whatever nightmares had gripped her. Now she slept soundly again, one small hand curled around the edge of his jacket sleeve, as if even in sleep she was afraid he might leave. He should have been downstairs coordinating the operation, reviewing intel, preparing his men for what was coming. Instead, he sat in the leather chair beside the couch, watching this child breathe and remembering another child from another lifetime. The memory came unbidden, as it always did in the quiet hours before dawn. So, 32 years ago, the Dong Demon district before the gentrification, when it was still a warren of narrow alleys and forgotten families. He'd been 8 years old, and his sister Yuna had been 4, the same age Maria probably was, though Maria seemed older, hardened by circumstances no child should know. Their mother had been a seamstress, working 16-hour days in a factory that made designer knockoffs for export. Their father was a ghost, a memory of a man who'd left before Yuna was born. She could still see the cramped apartment clearly. One room that served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space, the walls so thin you could hear the neighbors' conversations word for word. His mother would come home with bleeding fingers from her needlework, but she'd always smile when she saw them, always pretend she wasn't exhausted beyond measure. Gia, she'd say, using the affectionate diminutive of his name. You took care of your sister today? And he always had. That was his job, his purpose. While their mother worked herself to death one stitch at a time, G made sure Yuna ate, made sure she didn't wander into traffic, made sure she laughed at least once a day, even when there was nothing to laugh about. He'd been good at it, too. Responsible. Devoted. Right up until the day he wasn't there. It had been a Tuesday. He remembered that because Tuesdays were when the street vendors sold haddock for a half price at the market, and he convinced himself he could leave Yuna alone for 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. To run and get them the sweet pancakes that were her favorite. She'd been playing with her dolls, content and safe in their locked apartment. Their mother wouldn't be home for another 4 hours. 15 minutes. That's all it took for the world to end. The fire had started in the electronics repair shop on the first floor, faulty wiring that ignited like a match to kindling. By the time G had smelled the smoke from 3 blocks away, by the time he'd run back through streets that suddenly seemed infinitely long, the building was an inferno. He could still feel the heat on his face, still hear the screams, still remember the firefighter who grabbed him around the waist as he tried to run inside. There's a little girl in there, he'd screamed. My sister, apartment 304. She's 4 years old. Please. They'd tried. He had to give them that. 2 firefighters had gone in, and they'd made it to the 3rd floor. But the stairwell had collapsed, and they'd barely escaped with their own lives. The building burned for 3 hours before they contained it. They found Yuna's body 2 days later, after the rubble had cooled enough to search. His mother had died exactly 1 week after the funeral. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but G knew better. She died of a broken heart, of guilt, of a grief so profound that her body simply gave up. In her final moments, delirious with pain, she looked at him and whispered, "You were supposed to protect her." Those were the last words she ever spoke to him. G had been placed in state care after that, shuffled through a system that saw him as just another orphan statistic. He'd lasted 6 months before running away, living on the streets, doing whatever it took to survive. The guilt had been a constant companion, a weight that pressed down on his chest every waking moment. He'd failed the one job that mattered. He'd been entrusted with something precious, and he let it slip through his fingers for the sake of 15 minutes and a sweet pancake. The streets had taught him many things. How to fight, how to steal, how to read people's intentions before they acted on them, how to survive when the world wanted you dead or invisible. But most importantly, they'd taught him that promises were the only currency that mattered. Your word was the only thing that couldn't be taken from you, only given away. And once given, it was sacred. He'd built the Black Crane Syndicate on that principle. Every deal, every arrangement, every alliance was bound by his word. He kept his promises because if he didn't, he was back in that apartment with Yuna, failing the only test that really mattered. The criminal empire, the power, the fear he inspired, all of it was armor against that 8-year-old boy who'd chosen Hadiak over duty. And now this girl, this Maria with her teddy bear and her princess pajamas, had walked into his club and said the one thing that could shatter that armor. My mommy told me the man with the flower tattoo keeps his promises. Someone had told her about him. Someone had looked at a terrified child and said, find a gangster with a geometric tattoo. He'll help you. That someone had trusted him with the most precious thing in the world, a child's life. Had trusted that beneath the violence and the vice, there was still an 8-year-old boy who remembered what it felt like to fail. G looked down at Maria's hand, still clutching his jacket. She'd had no reason to trust him. He was a stranger, a criminal, a man with blood on his hands and darkness in his soul. But she'd walked up to him anyway, because someone had told her he kept his promises, because somewhere in this cynical, brutal city, his reputation for keeping his word had reached desperate mothers who needed someone to protect their children. He carefully extracted his sleeve from her grip and stood, moving to the window. Dawn was beginning to break over the skyline, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere out there, Maria's mother might already be dead. Her baby brother was hours away from being sold like cargo, and he'd promised to bring them home. Quan appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. We've got a location. One of our informants spotted the cleaner's van at an industrial complex in Buchan, private estate owned by a shell company linked to Councilman Park. Heavy security, but nothing we can't handle. How certain are you? G asked, not turning from the window. 80%. Could be a decoy, but it's the best lead we have. G was quiet for a moment, watching the sun rise over a city that had taken everything from him and then given him everything back in a different form. Power instead of family. Fear instead of love. An empire built on broken promises kept. Assemble the team, he said finally. Full tactical gear. We move in 90 minutes. Gee. Kwan's voice was soft, careful. You know this could all be for nothing, right? The mother could be dead. The baby could already be gone. We could burn everything we built for a promise we can't keep. G turned to face his second-in-command, and in that moment, Kwan saw something in his eyes that he'd never seen before, not just determination, but something raw and wounded, something that had been buried for decades. I was 8 years old when I broke my promise. G said quietly, I left my 4-year-old sister alone for 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. And she died because I wasn't there to protect her. He glanced back at Maria, sleeping peacefully on the couch. I've spent 24 years building an empire on the ashes of that failure, on the principle that I would never again break a promise that mattered. So yes, we could lose everything. But if we do, at least we'll lose at trying to be the men we claim to be. Kwan nodded slowly, understanding settling over his features. The Maria debt. G agreed. I owed one little girl everything and gave her nothing. Maybe I can balance the scales with this one. That's not how karma works, brother. No, G said, a bitter smile touching his lips. But it's the closest I'll ever get to redemption. He moved past Kwan into the hallway, his shoulders squared, his purpose crystallized. Behind him, Maria slept on, safe for now in the sanctuary of monsters who remembered what it meant to fail. And ahead of him, in an industrial complex in Buchan, waited a chance to keep a promise that might not save his soul, but would at least let him face the ghost of his sister without looking away. Dawn had broken. The war had begun. And Chong-ji was going to keep his word, or die trying, because this time he wouldn't leave for Hadiak. This time he'd stay until the end. The war room had transformed from a nightclub into a military operations center in the span of 2 hours. The Blue Lotus Lounge's back storage area, normally filled with liquor crates and cleaning supplies, now housed a tactical command post that would have impressed any special forces unit. Wall-mounted monitors displayed live feeds from traffic cameras, satellite imagery, and encrypted communications channels. A scale model of the Buchan Industrial Complex sat on a folding table, constructed with frightening accuracy from cardboard, wire, and photos printed from reconnaissance drones. G stood at the head of the table, surrounded by his inner circle. Kwan worked a laptop, cycling through intelligence reports. Min Jun, their tech specialist who usually handled the club's sound system, had his hands flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously, breaking through firewalls and accessing security systems that were supposed to be impenetrable. The rest of the team, 8 men handpicked for their specific skills, studied the model with the focused intensity of surgeons reviewing operation. Talk to me, G said, his voice cutting through controlled chaos. What do we know? Min Jun pulled up a blueprint on the main monitor. The complex is registered as Hanul Import-Export. On paper, they process textile shipments from Southeast Asia. In reality, it's a front for whatever the hell Park's people wanted to be. He zoomed in on a section of the building. The main structure is 3 stories, mostly warehouse space. But look here, he highlighted an area that appeared to be solid foundation. Ground-penetrating radar shows a subsurface level that's not on any official plans. Roughly 2,000 square feet, accessible only through a secured elevator in the northwest corner. A basement they don't want anyone knowing about, Kwan said. That's where they keep high-value cargo. Or people they're processing, another enforcer, De Jong, added grimly. He was their extraction specialist, a former military police officer who'd left the service after refusing an order to cover up his commanding officer's corruption. Classic trafficking setup. Keep the victims below ground, isolated. with only one way in or out. Makes them easier to control. G studied the blueprint, his mind cataloging every detail. Security? Significant. Min Jun brought up thermal imaging. 12 guards on the perimeter, rotating in 4-hour shifts. Another 6 inside the main building. The elevator to the basement requires both a key card and biometric scan, fingerprint or retinal. We're not sure which. The basement itself is a blank spot on our scans, which means it's shielded. Probably reinforced concrete walls, maybe Faraday cage construction to block signals. So we go in blind once we reach the basement. G said, it wasn't a question. Essentially, yes, we won't have comms, won't have thermal, won't know what we're walking into until we're inside. Quan leaned forward, pointing to guard positions on the model. We've been watching the shift changes. They're sloppy. 3 minutes of overlap where the outgoing and incoming guards are both distracted with handoff procedures. That's our window for initial breach. But G, even with that advantage, we're looking at 18 armed hostiles who will absolutely call for backup the moment they realize something's wrong. How long before that backup arrives? G asked. If they call regular police, 8 to 12 minutes, depending on traffic. If they call Councilman Park's private response team, for minutes. They've got a tactical unit station less than 2 miles away, probably for exactly this kind of situation. So we have 4 minutes from alarm to reinforcements. G said, processing the timeline, and we need at least 2 of those minutes to extract the targets and retreat, which gives us approximately 2 minutes to breach, locate, and secure Maria's family, De-Young said. Assuming they're even there, assuming they're still alive, assuming Captain Lee wasn't lying about the location to send us into a trap. The room went quiet. Every man there understood the stakes, the astronomical risk they were taking based on limited intelligence and a child's desperate plea. This wasn't their usual operation, controlled, calculated, with multiple contingencies and escape routes. This was a suicide run dressed up as a rescue mission. There's something else, Min Jun said hesitantly, pulling up a new set of data. I've been monitoring the cleaners' communication network. Encrypted, but I found a backdoor through one of their contractor systems. There's been a lot of chatter in the last 2 hours, all centered on the Buchin facility. What kind of chatter? G's attention sharpened. Preparation chatter. They're moving up their timeline. The transfer that was supposed to happen at dawn, it's happening in 45 minutes. They're loading a transport vehicle now. Refrigerated truck. The kind used for medical supplies or organ transport. But the manifest doesn't list any medical cargo. The implication hung in the air like poison. Quan's jaw tightened. They're moving the baby. Maybe the mother too, if she's still breathing. Which means we don't have 90 minutes, G said, his voice deadly calm. We have 30, maybe less. He looked around the table at his men, each one a veteran of 100 operations, each one understanding that what he was about to ask might be the last thing he ever asked them. I won't order anyone into this. It's a bad operation with worse odds and no guaranteed payoff. But I'm going. Anyone who wants to stand down, do it now. No shame, no consequences. No one moved. De-Young actually smiled, a tight, fierce expression. Brother, if we wanted good odds and guaranteed payoffs, we wouldn't be working for a crime syndicate. We'd be accountants. A ripple of dark laughter ran through the room. Min Jun cracked his knuckles and returned to his keyboards. I'll need 3 minutes to loop their security cameras and create a false clear on their motion sensors. After that, you'll be ghosts as far as their systems are concerned. I'll coordinate the breach team, Quan said, already pulling up tactical gear from storage lockers. We go in 2 vehicles. Primary extraction team and a support unit to handle interference. Suppress weapons, non-lethal options where possible. We're not trying to leave a massacre. We're trying to rescue civilians. What about transport for the targets? Another enforcer asked. If the mother's injured, we can't exactly throw her in the back of a van. Ambulance, G decided. Min Jun, can you hijack one? Can I hijack one? Min Jun muttered, offended. I can hijack a fleet. Give me 5 minutes. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the emergency services dispatch system with the ease of someone opening an unlocked door. De-Young was studying the building model, his tactical mind already running scenarios. The elevator is our bottleneck. If they shut it down remotely, we're trapped. We need a backup exit strategy. Explosives, one of the younger enforcers suggested. Blow through the basement ceiling, create our own exit, and risk bringing the whole structure down on top of the people we're trying to save? Quan shook his head. No, we need something more surgical. G's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an encrypted message from one of their police contacts. His expression darkened as he read it. Captain Lee just filed a report claiming a dangerous fugitive kidnapped a child from a lawful operation and is likely armed and violent. He's officially made Maria the victim and me the villain. If we're caught at that facility, there's no talk our way out. We're cop killers, child kidnappers, the works. So Lee's covering his bases. Quan said, creating a narrative where he's a hero and we're the monsters, no matter how this plays out. Smart, G admitted. Evil, but smart. Which means we can't leave witnesses who'll back his version of events. We need proof, video, documentation, something that contradicts his story completely. Min Jun's eyes lit up. The basement, if they're using it for processing and holding, they'll have records. Probably cameras, too, for their buyers to review the merchandise before purchase. If I can access their server. Do it, G said. Quan, adjust the plan. We're not just extracting. We're documenting everything. Body cameras on every team member. Direct feedback to our secure server. Whatever we see down there, we preserve. The team moved with renewed purpose, gearing up with practice efficiency. Tactical vests over dark clothing. Suppressed pistols, backup magazines, zip ties for restraining hostiles. De-Young distributed small medical kits. Trauma supplies for field stabilization. Min Jun configured their communication headsets, giving them at least a few seconds of warning before the shielded basement cut them off from the outside world. G watched them prepare, feeling the weight of command settle over him like a familiar coat. These men were putting their lives on the line because he'd made a promise to a 6-year-old girl, because his guilt over his sister dead for 24 years had manifested as a burning need to save a family he'd never met. It was irrational, emotional, everything a crime lord shouldn't be. But it was also the only thing that made him feel human. 10 minutes, Quan announced, checking his watch. Vehicles are staged. Routes are planned. Everyone knows their role. G nodded, then walked to the doorway that separated the war room from his office. Through the glass, he could see Maria still sleeping, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. In 30 minutes, he'd either be bringing her family home or die in the attempt. There was no middle ground, no compromise solution. He thought of Yuna, of her laugh, of the way she called him Appa, with absolute trust that her big brother would always protect her. He thought of his mother's final words, the accusation that had haunted him through every day since. And he thought of this moment, this impossible rescue that might finally let him look his dead family in the eye. Let's go bring them home, G said, turning back to his men. The cranes are gathering. And God, help anyone who stand in our way. Outside, the sun had fully risen over Seoul, painting the city in harsh morning light. Somewhere in Bucheon, in a basement that officially didn't exist, Maria's family waited for rescue they had no reason to believe would come. But Chong Ji kept his promises. And he was coming, ready or not. The world was about to remember why the Black Crane Syndicate was feared. The convoy rolled to the pre-dawn streets of Bucheon in deliberate silence. 2 black vans with tinted windows, a hijacked ambulance trailing behind, all of them ghosts in the early morning traffic. G sat in the lead vehicle's passenger seat, his tactical vest tight against his chest, the weight of his suppressed pistol a familiar comfort at his hip. Through the windshield, the industrial complex materialized from the urban sprawl, like a fortress designed to be overlooked. Gray concrete walls, minimal signage, the kind of building people's eyes slid past without registering. 2 minutes out, Quan said from the driver's seat, his voice steady despite the tension radiating through every line of his body. Min Jun, status? The tech specialist's voice crackled through their earpieces. Security feeds are looped. You're invisible for the next 8 minutes. Then the system auto-resets, and they'll know something's wrong. Motion sensors are showing all clear. Their guards think it's just another boring morning. G checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. The transport truck was scheduled to leave at 6:15. They had 28 minutes to breach, locate, extract, and disappear before Captain Lee's world realized it was under attack. 28 minutes to keep a promise to a sleeping child who trusted a monster with a flower tattoo. The vans pulled into an access alley 300 meters from the target, killing their engines in synchronized silence. 8 men emerged like shadows given form, De-Young leading the breach team, 2 enforcers flanking for suppression, another pair designated as carriers for the extraction. G moved among them with the quiet authority of a conductor before a symphony, checking equipment with practiced efficiency. No one spoke. They'd rehearsed this enough that words were unnecessary. Quan touched G's shoulder, his eyes asking the question he'd asked a dozen times in the past hour. Are you sure? And G answered the same way he'd answered every time, with a single, certain nod. Because doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford, and hesitation was the difference between rescue and massacre. They move as a unit through the industrial park, using the morning's long shadows as cover, their footfalls silent on pavement that should have betrayed their presence. The complex's perimeter fence was 8 feet of chain link topped with razor wire, intimidating to civilians, trivial to professionals. De-Young produced a compact bolt cutter, and 3 seconds later, a section of fence peeled back like paper. They slipped through the gap one by one, reforming on the other side with the fluid precision of a single organism. The guard at the northwest entrance was exactly where Min Jun's reconnaissance had predicted. Sitting in a small booth, his attention divided between a flickering security monitor and his phone, probably scrolling through social media to fight the boredom of a shift that never saw action. He didn't notice the shadow that detached from the building's corner, didn't register the movement behind him until De-Young's arm locked around his throat in a chokehold that cut off blood flowed his brain without crushing his windpipe. The guard struggled for 3 seconds, went limp for 4, and was zip-tied and gagged before his phone hit the ground. 1 down. De-Young whispered into his mic, "Entry secured." G reached the booth, his eyes scanning the guard security panel. The elevator access showed green, unlocked during shift changes, exactly as Intel had predicted. He gestured to the team, and they converged on the entrance like water flowing downhill, silent and inevitable. The door's electronic lock surrendered to Min Jun's prepared bypass card, and suddenly they were inside, breathing recycled air that smelled of concrete and something darker. Fear, desperation, the accumulated misery of people held against their will. The interior was exactly what the blueprints had promised. A cavernous warehouse space filled with legitimate cargo containers and forklifts, the mundane camouflage for something monstrous. 2 guards patrolled the main floor, visible through gaps in the stacked containers. Quan made a gesture, and 2 enforcers peeled off, circling to intercept. G didn't watch the takedown. He'd trained these men himself, knew they'd handle it with professional efficiency. His attention was fixed on the elevator at the far end of the warehouse, its steel doors reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead like a portal to another world. They reached the elevator without incident, the warehouse now holding 4 unconscious guards instead of 2. G pressed his palm against the biometric scanner, wondering if Min Jun's hack would actually work or if alarms were already screaming in some security office. The seconds stretched like hours. Then the scanner blinked green and the elevator doors whispered open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded deafening in the silence. Comms will cut once you're below ground. Min Jun's voice reminded them, already beginning to fracture with static. You'll have 4 minutes before I lose the security loop. After that, all hell breaks loose. Understood, G said, stepping into the elevator. 6 men followed, Quan, De-Young, and 4 others whose names would either become legend or footnotes depending on the next few minutes. The doors closed, sealing them in brushed steel and artificial light. G pressed the unmarked button at the bottom of the panel, the one that officially didn't exist. The elevator descended with mechanical smoothness, carrying them away from the legitimate world into the darkness beneath. G felt his ears pop as they dropped, felt the weight of earth and concrete pressing down from above. His hand rested on his pistol, not gripping it yet but ready, always ready. Beside him, Kwan's breathing had slowed to the deliberate rhythm of a man preparing for violence. Dae-young's eyes were closed, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or simply tactical review. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and Chong-ji stepped into hell. The basement was clinical in its cruelty. White walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects, the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaning products failing to mask something organic and wrong. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors that had reinforced locks and small observation windows. From behind those doors came sounds that would haunt Ji's dreams. A woman sobbing, a child crying, the desperate whispers of people who'd given up hope of rescue. 2 guards stood at a central desk, their attention on paperwork rather than security monitors. They looked up as the elevator opened, confusion giving way to alarm as they registered armed men in tactical gear where authorized personnel should be. One reached for his radio. The other went for his weapon. Neither completed their action. Dae-young moved like lightning in human form, closing the distance in 3 strides and delivering a strike to the first guard's throat that dropped him gasping. Kwan suppressed pistol cough once, twice. Not lethal shots, but precise impacts to the second guard's shoulder and thigh that sent him crumpling. Both guards were restrained in silence before their bodies fully hit the floor, professional violence executed with surgical precision. Ji was already moving past them, his eyes scanning the doors, looking for some indication of where they keep a mother and infant. The third door on the left had a different lock, newer, more substantial, the kind used for high-value cargo. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, filtering through the ambient noise for anything that would tell him Maria's family was inside. There, so faint he almost missed it. The distinctive cry of an infant, hungry and afraid, the sound a baby brother would make. Ji nodded to Kwan, who produced a small-shaped charge from his vest. They had minutes, maybe seconds before the alarm sounded, before reinforcements arrived, before their window of opportunity slammed shut. But in this moment, standing outside a locked door with his team arrayed behind him like an avenging army, Chong-ji felt something he hadn't felt in 24 years. He felt like he might actually keep his promise. The charge detonated with a sharp crack that would absolutely alert anyone else in the facility. The door's lock shattered, and Ji kicked it open, his weapon raised, ready for threats. Inside, on a bare mattress on a concrete floor, sat a young woman holding a crying infant against her chest. Her face was bruised, her clothes torn, but her eyes burned with the same desperate hope that Maria's had held when she'd walked into the Blue Lotus. "Are you Maria's mother?" Ji asked quietly. The woman's sob was answer enough. Ji lowered his weapon and extended his hand, just as he had with her daughter hours before. "I keep my promises," he said. "Let's bring you home." The transport truck never made it past the industrial complex's gates. Kwan's team had intercepted it with professional efficiency. 3 armed drivers now zip-tied in the back of their own vehicle, their cargo of forged documents and transfer orders secured as evidence. But Ji wasn't interested in the drivers or their paperwork. He wanted the man who'd orchestrated everything, the architect of Maria's nightmare. Captain Lee Sangmin arrived at the Buchin facility at 6:23 a.m., 8 minutes after his security team had finally noticed the looped camera feeds and 11 minutes too late to stop the extraction. He came in his personal vehicle, a black luxury sedan that probably cost more than most families earned a year, flanked by 2 of his most trusted operatives. They found the facility in controlled chaos. Unconscious guards being revived by paramedics, police trying to secure a crime scene they didn't understand, and absolutely no sign of the prisoners who'd been in the basement. What they did find was Chong-ji, sitting calmly in the facility's main office, his tactical vest discarded, but his weapon still holstered at his hip. Behind him, Min-jun's laptop displayed a split-screen feed. On one side, live footage from inside the basement showing the empty cells and scattered evidence. On the other, recorded video of everything they documented during the extraction. "Captain Lee," Ji said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than in the aftermath of a tactical raid. "Thank you for coming. We need to have a conversation." Lee's face cycled through shock, rage, and calculation in the span of 3 seconds. His hand moved toward his weapon, but Kwan materialized from behind a filing cabinet, his suppressed pistol aimed with casual precision at Lee's center mass. The captain's operatives froze, recognizing immediately that they were outmatched and outmaneuvered. Your family is safe, G continued, ignoring the weapons and tension. Maria's mother and brother are receiving medical care at private facility. They'll be returned to her within the hour. He gestured to an empty chair across from him. Sit. We're going to discuss your future. You've just signed your death warrant, Lee said, but he sat anyway, his confidence cracking around the edges. Councilman Park will bury you. The police commissioner will what? Investigate the child trafficking operation you've been running under the guise of immigration enforcement. G turned the laptop around, showing Lee footage of the basement, the cells, the restraints, the medical equipment used for sedating victims. We found 12 families down there, Captain. 12, including a woman who'd been held for 6 days and an infant scheduled for transport to a buyer in Singapore. That's what your lawful processing looks like. Lee's face had gone pale, but his voice remained defiant. That footage proves nothing. Unauthorized entry, no warrant, no chain of custody. It'll be thrown out before it reaches a courtroom. You're right, G agreed, which is why we're not taking it to a courtroom. He pulled out his phone, opening the camera application. We're taking it directly to the public. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every prosecutor who's been trying to crack this city's corruption for years. But first, you're going to tell the story yourself. Go to hell. G's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Your daughter attends Seoul International School. Apartment in Gangnam, registered under your wife's maiden name. Your son is in his 2nd year at medical school, scholarship funded by a foundation that traces back to Councilman Park's shell companies. He paused, letting that information settle. I'm not threatening them, Captain. I'm simply observing that you built a very comfortable life on the backs of trafficked children. And now you're going to explain exactly how you did it. Lee's remaining color drained completely. You're insane. Even if I did what you're asking, Park would have been killed before sunrise. Probably, G acknowledged, but Park's reach only extends as far as a political protection. And that protection evaporates the moment federal investigators get involved. He set the phone on the desk between them, the camera lens aimed at Lee like an accusatory eye. So here's your choice. Record a full confession, names, dates, operations, the entire structure of your trafficking network. Or I release what we have right now, incomplete, but damning enough to destroy you while leaving Park mostly intact. He survives, you take the fall alone, and your family spends the next 20 years visiting you in prison. And if I confess, then you give us everything we need to bring down the entire operation. Park, his political connections, the buyers, the logistics, all of it. In exchange, you get witness protection. Federal custody instead of general population. Your family gets relocated under new identities before Park even knows you've turned. G leaned forward. You'll still go to prison, Captain, but you'll survive it. And your children won't spend their lives answering for your crimes. The office was silent except for the hum of Min Jun's laptop and the distant sound of police radios outside. Lee stared at the phone, at G, at the ruins of everything he'd built on the suffering of innocence. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the device. Start with your name and rank, G said quietly. Then tell us everything. Captain Lee Sang-min took a breath, looked directly into the camera, and began to confess. Every name, every transaction, every child sold. The words came slowly at first, then faster, a dam breaking under pressure it could no longer contain. G recorded it all with the same careful attention he brought to everything, knowing that this confession was more than evidence. It was the price of his promise to a little girl who trusted a monster to be something better. By the time the real police arrived, the federal investigators Min Jun had contacted, the ones who answered to accountability rather than political favors, Captain Lee had signed a confession in more than words. He'd signed it in tears and shame, in the desperate hope that cooperation might spare his family the full weight of his sins. G handed him over without resistance, watching as federal agents led the captain away in handcuffs. The man who'd trafficked children under protection of badges was finally being held accountable by the law he'd corrupted. It wasn't redemption, But it was justice. The Blue Lotus Lounge had never seen a morning like this. Sunlight streamed to the windows where smoke and neon usually reigned, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits in the air. The jazz stage sat empty. The bar was closed, but the main floor was filled with energy that had nothing to do with vice or violence. It was something rarer, more precious, the electricity of hope being fulfilled. Maria sat on the edge of G's private booth, her legs swinging nervously, the worn teddy bear clutched so tightly against her chest that its stuffing was probably compressed beyond recovery. She hadn't slept since G had left for the raid, had refused food, had simply waited with the terrible patience of a child who'd learned too young that promises were fragile things that broke without warning. When the door opened and her mother walked in, walking, not carried, though she moved stiffly and leaned on Kwan's offered arm, Maria's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of a heartbeat. The little girl was moving before anyone could stop her, launching herself across the room with a cry that was equal parts joy and anguish, colliding with her mother hard enough that both of them nearly fell. "Mommy, Mommy." The words dissolved into sobs in a language that mixed Spanish and desperation, a child's vocabulary inadequate for expressing relief this profound. Maria's mother, Isabella, G had learned during the extraction, sank to her knees and wrapped both arms around her daughter, her own tears streaming freely. In one arm she still held her infant son, swaddled in a blanket that one of G's men had procured from somewhere. The baby was crying too, probably hungry and confused, but alive, breathing, safe. G watched from the stairs, deliberately keeping his distance from the reunion. This moment wasn't his. It belonged to a family that had been shattered and was now, against astronomical odds, whole again. His men formed a loose perimeter around the scene, their hardened faces betraying emotions they usually buried beneath layers of professional detachment. More than one enforcer was wiping at his eyes, pretending it was just dust or fatigue. Isabella looked up eventually, her gaze searching the room until it found G. She said something in rapid Spanish to Maria, who nodded and took her baby brother with surprising gentleness for a 6-year-old. Then Isabella rose on unsteady legs and walked toward the man who'd kept his promise. She stopped 3 feet away, studying him with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and somehow hadn't gone completely dark. "My daughter told me about the man with the flower tattoo," she said, her English accented but clear. "She said her teacher mentioned you once, said you were dangerous but fair, that you helped people who had nowhere else to turn. Your daughter is braver than most adults I know," G replied quietly. She walked into a room full of criminals and demanded justice. That takes either courage or desperation. It takes trust. Isabella's voice cracked slightly. "She trusted you because I raised her to believe that even in darkness, there are those who carry light. I didn't think those people existed anymore. I was wrong." She moved closer, and before G could react, she embraced him. A brief, fierce hug that spoke volumes about gratitude and recognition, and the impossible debt that could never truly be repaid. When she stepped back, her eyes were fierce. "How do I thank you for my children's lives?" "You don't," G said simply. "You take them somewhere safe. You rebuild. You teach your daughter that her trust wasn't misplaced." He paused, then added something that surprised even himself. "And someday, when someone else needs help, you tell them the same thing someone told her. Find the people who keep their promises." By noon, word spread through the district like wildfire through dry grass. The whisper started in the markets where vendors had watched the cleaners operate with impunity. They spread to the apartment buildings where families had disappeared without explanation. They reached the small businesses that paid protection money to stay safe, the restaurants where workers labored on the table, the forgotten corners where the city's most vulnerable tried to survive. Changji had gone to war with corrupt officials for a little girl's promise. He'd rescued 12 families from a trafficking operation. He'd made a police captain confess on camera. And he'd done it all without asking for payment, without demanding territory, without leveraging it for power. The Blue Lotus Lounge became something different that day. People started appearing at the door, not customers seeking drinks or gambling, but families seeking guidance. A mother whose son had been arrested on false charges. An elderly man whose pension was being stolen by his landlord. a teenager whose sister was being threatened by a gang that operated outside G's territory. Quan watched the growing crowd with something between alarm and awe. G, we're not social workers. We're a crime syndicate. We can't help everyone who shows up with a problem. No, G agreed, observing the people who come seeking the man with the flower tattoo. But we can help some of them. And we can make sure the neighborhood knows there are lines we won't cross, principles we won't violate. He turned to his second-in-command. The Black Crane Syndicate doesn't answer to the law, Quan. But maybe we can be the law for people the system has abandoned. That night, as Maria slept peacefully in a safe house G had arranged, as Isabella held her baby son, and wept tears of relief, as Captain Lee's confession burned through the internet, and federal investigators descended on Councilman Park's empire like avenging angels, Chong Ji stood at the window of his office and looked out over the district he controlled. He was still a criminal, still a man with blood on his hands and darkness in his soul, still haunted by a sister he'd failed to save 24 years ago. But he was also the man who kept his promises. And in a city where law and justice had diverged into separate, often opposing forces, that reputation had become something more valuable than territory or profit. It had become hope. And hope, G was learning, was the most powerful currency of all. 15 years had a way of transforming everything while leaving certain truths unchanged. The Blue Lotus Lounge still stood in the same district, though gentrification had crept in around its edges like ivy on old stone. The neon lotus overhead still glowed cyan against the night sky, but now it shared space with artisanal coffee shops and boutique galleries that catered to young professionals who had no idea what the building had once been, what it still was, beneath the renovated facade. Chong Ji stood in his office on a warm June evening, watching the sun paint the city in shades of amber and gold, when Quan knocked on the doorframe. His second-in-command had gone gray at the temples, his face lined with the years of managing an empire that had evolved from pure criminal enterprise into something more complex, more nuanced. They still ran protection rackets and controlled vice operations, still operated in the shadows where law and order feared to tread. But they also did other things now, things that didn't appear in any ledger. She's here, Quan said simply. G turned from the window, straightening the collar of his suit jacket. The geometric tattoo on his shoulder had faded slightly with age, but it was still visible when he wore short sleeves, still recognizable to those who knew its significance. Is everyone ready? The family's in the main room. Half the neighborhood is outside trying to get a glimpse. You'd think we were hosting royalty. Quan's smile was slight, but genuine. In a way, I suppose we are. They descended the stairs together, and G felt the weight of 15 years compress into a single moment. The main floor of the Blue Lotus had been transformed for the occasion. Banners hung from the ceiling. Tables laden with food prepared by every restaurant owner in a 6-block radius. Flowers arranged with the kind of care usually reserved for weddings. In the center of it all stood Isabella, older now, but still carrying that fierce spark in her eyes, holding her teenage son Miguel, who had grown into a young man who barely remembered the basement where he'd spent the first 6 months of his life. And beside them, wearing a cap and gown over a simple dress, clutching a diploma from Seoul National University, stood Maria. She'd grown from a little girl in princess pajamas into a young woman of 21, her features carrying the same determination that had driven her to walk into a gangster's club at 3 a.m. She'd studied law, criminal justice specifically, with a focus on human trafficking and corruption. Her thesis had been on the failures of institutional protection systems and the role of alternative power structures in marginalized communities. She graduated summa cum laude, with offers from prestigious firms and advocacy organizations. Everyone wanted Maria Reyes on their team. But first, she wanted to come here. When she saw G, her face broke into a smile that carried echoes of the child she'd been, trusting, brave, unshakable in her conviction that promises mattered. She crossed the room in quick strides and did something that would have shocked anyone who didn't know their history. She hugged a man the newspapers still called the Flower Demon, the crime lord who'd expanded his influence across 3 districts, while somehow maintaining a reputation for protecting rather than preying on the vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," G said quietly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he'd used 15 years ago when he'd asked her name. "Thank you for the invitation," Maria replied. stepping back, but keeping one hand on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that spoke volumes. And thank you for everything else. The scholarship fund, the tutors, the safe housing when we needed it. You changed our lives that night. You changed mine, G corrected. You reminded me that some things are worth being a monster for. The celebration lasted 4 hours. Isabella told stories about Maria's academic achievements, while Miguel, now a high school soccer star being recruited by university teams, raided the dessert table with the enthusiasm of a teenager who'd been promised unlimited sweets. Neighbors filtered through, paying their respects to the graduate and to the man who'd made her education possible. Every person in that room had a story about the Black Crane Syndicate. Money when rent came due, protection when threats materialized, justice when the legal system failed them. As the evening wound down, Maria found G on the stairs where he'd retreated to watch rather than participate. She sat beside him, her cap askew, her diploma carefully protected in its leather folder. "I got a job offer," she said. "International Criminal Court, The Hague. They want me on their trafficking prosecution team." G felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, certainly, but also loss. "That's exactly where you should be." "I know." Maria was quiet for a moment, watching her mother laugh with Quan about something. "But I wanted to ask your advice first. Is it naive to think I can change the system from inside? To believe that law and justice can actually align?" "Probably," G admitted, "but naivety that refuses to die becomes conviction, and conviction changes the world." He looked at her, this young woman who'd walked into hell, and emerged as living proof that promises kept could ripple across years. "Your mother trusted you to find help when she had none. You trusted me to keep my word when you had no reason to. Now the world needs to trust that someone will fight for the people everyone else forgets. Be that person, Maria." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The girl who begged the Korean Mafia boss becomes an international prosecutor. That's quite a story. "It's not a story," G said softly. "It's a legacy. Yours, mine, everyone in this room who decided that even monsters can choose to be something better." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Go to The Hague. Prosecute the traffickers. Change the system. And when you're successful, not if, when, remember that it started with courage. A little girl's courage to ask for help, and a criminal's courage to give it." Maria took his hand, rising to stand beside the man who'd saved her family and inadvertently shaped her future. Around them, the Blue Lotus Lounge hummed with life and laughter, a sanctuary for forgotten that had been born from one promise kept in the darkest hour. Outside, the neighborhood continued its evening rhythm, unaware that they were witnessing the culmination of something extraordinary. One night of courage had indeed changed hundreds of lives, and it was just beginning.